This is the Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume responding to that rate rise.
To bring down inflation means that hardworking Australians are going to pay more. Interest rates will be higher for longer if inflation stays higher for longer. Labor's lack of a plan is gambling with Australia's hardworking Australians' money and with our economy. I'm happy to take questions if you've got them.
Senator, one of the tough decisions the government says it's making is on infrastructure projects where costs have gone up by $33 billion. Cutting some of those projects or pushing them off would reduce demand in the building and construction sector. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, let's check the big litmus test on infrastructure projects, shall we? I mean, if you're going to cut infrastructure projects but keep the suburban rail loop in Victoria, a project that already costs look astronomical, over $130 billion. $30 billion just for the first section alone. This is a project that hasn't gone through Infrastructure Australia, that the Victorian Auditor General has already said the business case doesn't stack up, and yet this is an infrastructure project that the Albanese government won't back away from. I don't know how seriously you can take them when they say that they want to cut infrastructure projects for the sake of inflation.
So where would you like to see the government cut funding to tame inflation?
Well, I'll tell you what we wouldn't do. First of all, we wouldn't be taxing farmers. We wouldn't be taxing truckies because, of course, those costs instantly get passed on to grocery prices. We wouldn't be interfering in the energy markets in such a way that you're actually detracting new investors, turning them away, particularly in the gas markets, because we know that increasing supply is the only way that you're going to sustainably bring down energy costs in the future. And we wouldn't be spending an additional $188 billion, particularly that $45 billion of off-balance sheet funds, which the IMF specifically said have an inflationary impact. There is so much that this government can do, and instead it's got the wrong priorities, it's looking the other way, it hasn't got a plan to tackle inflation.
So would you cut the ballooning infrastructure spend?
Well, the infrastructure spend, you cannot take them seriously on the infrastructure spend if they are still planning to fund the suburban rail loop in Victoria, which is a Dan Andrews boondoggle. It's a Dan Andrews boondoggle. It should be the first thing to go. The first thing to go. If they're not cutting the suburban rail loop, quite frankly, they're not taking these infrastructure cuts seriously. They're simply trying to blame somebody else for rising inflation. Once again, they've blamed Vladimir Putin, first and foremost. Then they've blamed the Middle East. They've blamed Israel. And now they're blaming the States. Jim Chalmers can't take responsibility for this, and yet so much of the inflation balloon is in his control. He could be doing so much more.
That's Jane Hume responding to today's Cup Day rate rise.